Welcome back to the Global Payments Advisory Group Conference, Home Edition. Thank you for joining us for day two. Today we focus on a panel discussion on payment platform transformation from a product, operations, and technology perspective. Before we start the panel discussion, I welcome and introduce to the group Mr. Lester Owens as our executive speaker for today. Lester will set the stage for our panel discussion by giving us his insights on this topic. Lester is Senior Executive Vice President and Head of Operations of Wells Fargo & Company, responsible for building a more unified and integrated approach to Wells Fargo's business operations function that includes more than 70,000 employees. He serves on the Wells Fargo Operating Committee and is based out of New York. Lester has more than 30 years of leadership and risk management and operations experience in the financial services industry. Prior to joining Wells Fargo, he was Global Head of Operations for Bank of New York, Mellon, managed global banking wholesale operations at JP Morgan Chase, and headed significant operations functions for Deutsche Bank, Citi, and Bankers Trust. All of us here at Wells Fargo are delighted to have a leader with such deep knowledge base in global operations, particularly in the payments industry. His efforts to reinvest and lead transformation within Wells Fargo will benefit the cross-border payments industry. Thank you for joining us, Lester, today and sharing your insights with the Global Payments Advisory Group.
Thank you, Ashish. Appreciate it.
So Lester, given your overview and the limited time that we have, I thought the best to structure this discussion in a question and answer format. So let me start with the first question. By asking you what transformational priorities you see for the financial sector.
Well, I think there are a few. One is when I think about transformation, this environment continues to reinvent itself, especially with technology. Speed of execution continues to be key. If I think about what's happened with real-time payments. And the fact that payments being done in a more immediate fashion. Most recently, we talk about now FedNow and where the Federal Reserve is going with their product offering as well. That just demonstrate how, in some cases, the environment is starting to change. Coupled with the fact that you want to go again with a 24/7 operating environment to complement some of the things that's happening in the industry. The other thing that you're seeing is, unfortunately, the word called fraud in this environment. It's not something that's new, but people unfortunately have become smarter in how to defraud our client base at times. The more that we can do to continue to educate people on what's happening in the industry, I think the better off we all will be. And the third piece in this environment is continuing to look at intraday liquidity, making sure that you're managing it risk well, making sure that you're looking at counterparty risk, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those things are happening on top of here at Wells Fargo. We're continuing to change our payments landscape, and we're happy to say that we've invested heavily in this area, and will continue over the next 2 to 3 years to continue to put in platforms that we believe is best in class and will continue to drive us and help our clients going forward.
Thank you, Lester. So I think you said faster payments, 24/7, fraud, liquidity management as the key priorities. So appreciate your insights there. So second question, how in your opinion did financial institutions perform during COVID-19?
It's been interesting since early last year, and obviously I'm stating the obvious, but no one can have predicted what's happened. But what it does show is how resilient the financial services industry is. Overall, I would say for something that was so unexpected, I think that we've done well as a collective group. I think if you looked at Wells Fargo, we're talking hundreds of thousands of individuals who had to work from home. I would say that I think the team collectively has done a phenomenal job in making sure that our employees have the right tools within their homes to be able to operate. We've got the right risk management to make sure that we're doing the right thing by our client base at all times. I thought the management team did a really good job and continues to do a really good job in making sure that we collectively interface with our employees on an ongoing basis. As a matter of fact, over the last every week, I've been having listening sessions with many people deep in our organizations to make sure that they feel like they've got the tools. If there's anything that comes up that we know first and foremost, but we're also making sure that we're protecting our employees, right? So where we can, we're making sure that everybody has the ability to work from home. And what has changed is we found now that it does work well. The obvious question becomes, what do you do going forward? And we're grappling with that like any other organization to make sure that we provide the right flexibility, but we also understand the importance of having people get together, being able to work together for our client base, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that's important as well. So overall, going back to your question, Ashish, I'd say it's worked out probably better than we could have ever anticipated. I'm really proud of what the teams here in Wells Fargo has been able to accomplish especially for our client base and making sure that, we're up and running day in and day out.
No, thank you, Lester. And, being in our clients as they're participating in this conference, obviously we service them almost on a 24-hour basis. So, the ability for us through our operations in the US and overseas and international locations, it's just been phenomenal in terms of the operating units be able to just flawlessly service our client base.
Yeah, and I would say, Ashish, adding to that, I think our clients would be impressed by the ability to have teams really work together day in, day out. Obviously we use Zoom to our advantage in this case to make sure that people are connecting. We're making sure that we're meeting the right service level agreements, and we're also got a big transformation agenda on top of it. So a lot to do in a short period of time.
No, exactly. So one more question, Lester. What do you see as your priorities and areas of focus as you take on this significant and large load within Wells Fargo?
I think there's a few things that we're really focusing on. Continuing to look at how we can enhance the client experience, right? This is where, the bank as a whole is spending a significant amount of money on looking at our platforms. Everyone talks about digital. How can we provide more information to our clients in a more effective manner going forward? You hear people talk about self-servicing capabilities. We've talked about that as well, and how do we put more tools in the hands of our client base? That's also big. We have a big initiative with our contact center, by the way, in looking at some of our call routing capabilities. Can we leverage some of the artificial intelligence that will really help our customer service agents going forward? We're actually also looked at some of the paper-based transactions that we have, building new tools called Doc Capture. We're meeting just about every week talking about that. We have a pilot going live in the third quarter that really will be able to take data, be able to collect the data, extract the data, classify that information, leverage our AI capability so that we don't have to perform things manually, but rather do it electronically, and being able to service the client in a more effective way from a time frame standpoint. So that is really, so the transformation agenda is really on the forefront. We've actually also taken things like reconciliation, being able to, again, use artificial intelligence to be able to learn, classify these open recs, and being able to automatically match them, which will save us significant time going forward. So those are just some of the examples from a transformation standpoint. If I think about risk and controls, that continues to be high on our agenda. What we've been doing instead of looking vertically, but looking horizontally of where we could close any potential risk items going forward. So that's also important for us to be able to do, making sure we have the right risk indicators to be able to measure our success is another one. But all of this cannot be done without our people. So what we want to continue to do is continue to train, continue to provide better tools for our employees, continue to listen to what we think makes logical sense and how do we move the company forward. So that's a big agenda. We've elevated many of our people into key positions, especially when it comes to transformation, in order for us to continue to be better at what we think is a competitive advantage. And obviously, we want to be able to drive and be more efficient, simplify things or end-to-end processes where we can, eliminate redundant processes where possible, and continue to move the company forward so that our client base believes that what we're offering is really outstanding, and we want to make sure that we can sustain it going forward.
No, that's fantastic, Lester. Lots going on with the lens on customer and enhancing the experience in general. So I appreciate that. Well, follow-up question, sort of in the Wells Fargo construct. Diversity and inclusion are key priorities within our bank. Can you share your thoughts in this area to conclude our discussion for today?
Well, I think it's an important topic. It's important for any corporation. I have said this in just about every forum that I have been in, that companies are strong when you have a diverse group of people who think differently, right? And when you can bring people together to be able to have that conversation, it's very, very powerful. And I believe as senior leaders, you lead by example. And some of the things that we've been doing is providing even more training as it relates to just talk about diversity topics, which has been, I think, great. I, as an operating committee member, sponsor many individuals, just being able to help them to be able to navigate throughout the organization. We've talked about making sure that we're being fair from a recruiting standpoint, that we give everyone, ethnicity, gender, the opportunity going forward. We've also spent a lot of time talking about networking opportunities and how do we get individuals to be able to know more people within the bank, because obviously that helps the people to grow and to be able to have more opportunities. So the diversity topic is really important, and it's whether it's Charlie Scharf, the CEO, to the operating committee, down to the management team. It is something that we will continue to stress because we know it's the right thing to do for our people and for our client base.
Thank you, Lester, for those comments and your leadership. And let me also take this time to thank you for joining us at this conference. Global Payments Advisory Group, as you know, is very important for our financial institutional clients globally, but also of recently we are adding our U.S. corporate clients into this group. So we've obviously benefited from your insights and hope we have other opportunities to connect with you.
And thank you very much for having me come on, and hopefully not too long from now, I will be able to see everyone in person. So thank you very much.
Look forward to that, Lester, and I'm sure our clients are. We used to do this annually in San Francisco, so we look forward to getting back into that physical environment. Let me now turn it over to Craig Stewart, Head of Strategy and Planning for Treasury Management, to introduce our panelists and moderate today's discussion. We will conclude the session with a question and answer and open dialogue for the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. I'm happy to get the chance to participate in the advisory group's annual conference again this year. As you know, there are some pretty strong forces of innovation and technology modernization pushing change in transaction banking. And so today's discussion will build on that theme that Ashish and Lester had introduced a moment ago, transformation in the payments business. And with the help of our panelists, we'll talk about how established players in the payments ecosystem are adapting to new market demands and taking advantage of newer technologies that can upgrade core capabilities. So joining me today are 4 payments professionals who are kind enough to share their perspectives here with the GPAD group. We have Christopher Allen, Managing Director in the payments practice of Deloitte. We have Simon Birch, Executive General Manager, Payment Services with the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. We have Jason Christensen, the CIO for Payments and Treasury Management Technology at Wells Fargo Bank, and Rakesh Korpal, Head of Payment Operations at Wells Fargo Bank. So thank you all for joining me and participating in this panel. And before we begin, I just want to remind the audience, if you haven't done so already, please send questions, which we can use at the, and you can see the email address that will, for those questions that will flash on the screen, but we'll use in the live question and answer period at the conclusion of the panel. So with that, I'm going to get right into it and jump into our first question on payments transformation. And the way I wanted to frame up the topics is to ask, how did we get here that payment transformation suddenly feels like table stakes? I guess what has made payment transformation front and center for the strategic planning of commercial banks? And so Rakesh, I guess I'd like to ask you to start with a response, and then Simon, maybe we can hear from you.
Sure, thanks, Craig. So I think that if I have to put in some context, it would probably be with faster payments. So if we look across the globe, we'll see that certainly faster payments have taken off in a number of locations. But here in the US, for example, real-time payments has started to evolve significantly. We have the Fed that's getting ready to announce and start with Fed Now in 2023. We have such products as e-wallet and push-to-card that are coming to fruition. So the need to have immediate settlement has become much more of a need. These products and these channels and being able to deliver payments from point of entry to immediate settlement are starting to transform the payments landscape quite significantly. Now, in addition to that, it's not just an infrastructure issue, but we also have to look at it from other like products that are starting to come about, which are virtual account relationships. So managing through that activity, I think, is causing a lot of the transformation layers within the banking industry.
Great, I appreciate that perspective. Simon, can you give us your thoughts on when we talk about payment transformation, from your point of view, what are the typical scope and goals that a bank faces?
Yeah, I sort of echo a lot of what Rakesh said there. We're moving from a world where payments are strongly bundled, if we can use that word, in the primary banking relationship to a more open, more real-time environment, and one where payments are increasingly invisible and integrated into the ecosystem of whatever the transaction is. Direct revenue from payments is becoming commoditized and under a lot of pressure, and value comes from a variety of value-added steps. Increasingly, the banks don't even own the final payment step itself. Certainly, as things become more global, as payments become more invisible, as they become more meshed, as competitors innovate faster, I think, than traditional banks in the cloud and other venues, it's leading us to rethink that strategic planning that I think, and that frame set that we've always perhaps been traditionally looking through. So, what are the typical scope and goals? Resilience and availability, certainly key in a lot of big institutions. Mine, certainly mine, and I know all of us here. Speed of change, our ability to bring new features, ecosystems, and environments to market. Instant payments and the convergence onto instant payments rails as we move away from sort of the legacy batch-based, file-based that we've had. Extracting value from data. I think that's another sort of key thing, and I'm sure will be a theme throughout the conversation today. Are also really, really important for us to start to be innovating around and developing our strategies around.
So
Thanks.
could I just comment on this
Of course.
scope and goals also? Because I think Simon hit on that, right? And, you know, while we look at this payments infrastructure, we want to see real-time settlements. There are going to be instances where a transaction will stop because of an issue with either a format or some other alert. And so as a result of this, one of the things that we're looking at also, or banks should be looking at, is the ability to be able to support this, these alerts or these exceptions in a 24/7 environment. So understanding that this can happen at any time and making sure you have the appropriate resources to be able to move or disposition that transaction almost immediately.
Yeah, I appreciate you circling back on the 24/7 comment. And maybe Chris, I think you're going to add something there, and maybe you can pick up on that. You know, what are a 24/7 operating environment, for which is, I think, implicit in the customer's mind around real-time payments, must be a key driver of transformation. How are you seeing banks thinking about that?
They're just starting to think about it, really, and they need to think about it very quickly, because when you think about how we conduct operations in banks today, it's all primarily batch driven, and it runs on a daily cycle with a daily close, et cetera, for most things. That won't be true in the future. So you have to rethink all your process flows, your controls, all the regulatory aspects of the payments flows, the data, the analytics, upstream, downstream reporting. It's not just the technology. Once we get outside of a batch environment, the whole ecosystem of operations in a bank changes. So as banks are going through this tech transformation and trying to catch up to the technical debt that we've accrued in payments over the years, they need to keep this in mind. They want to be architecting for not just real-time payments, but also what else might come down the line after that. So staying nimble, having the architectures be very flexible, I think will be critical factors going forward.
Rakesh, anything else that you can add on that around the 24/7 operations? And what I'm particularly thinking about is, you know, what have we learned as we've started to, as banks, embrace, you know, 24/7 operations, about the tools or the routines that we didn't used to have that we need to put in place?
So I think following the fundamental controls is vital. So every single transaction will need to be screened for sanctions. Every single transaction will need to be screened for balance validation. And, you know, there may be other controls that banks will have in place. So I think keeping those fundamentals in place and then supplementing them with additional real-time information. So as an example, maybe a bad guy list that allows you to be able to understand, you know, the transaction is potentially destined to a bad person. And so you want to be able to disposition those as quickly as possible. So certainly you want to settle them, but there are going to be those that will be exception transactions that you need to return back to the originator as quickly as possible.
That's a good point, Rakesh. Thanks. Yeah, I think the exception handling is definitely one of those areas where, you know, formerly there's a little bit more lead time for banks to handle operationally. Let me go to Jason. I want to bring you into the conversation and ask a little bit about how you see changes that the business is trying to make with customer experience. And, you know, traditionally that's really been the point of where banks create incremental value, is around the customer channel experience and the delivery of payment services. And so how well is that aligned, those business strategies, to what's happening with payment transformation?
Thanks, Craig. That's a great question. I think, you know, part of the challenge that we have is all of our customers are moving ahead at a quick pace. They want more, they want things more efficiently, but we also have a challenge of, we have very complex clients that are large with a lot of tech capacity and ability to do things. and then also small clients who are really expecting us to lead them a little bit in the tech transformation. So, when we think about client journeys, there's a whole range of things that we have to be ready to support. Probably the easy one to pinpoint is APIs. We want to be able to let our clients interact with us the way that's most convenient and efficient for them. So we're going to really focus on, how do we give them the features and functions that they want in a way that they can integrate, but then also how do we build tools on top of those APIs so this maybe the not as sophisticated clients can use those features and functions as well. We talk a lot about client journey. So what can we do in the actual interaction with our clients, those tools that they use? How can we make them more efficient? How can we give them to them, where they want them, how they want them, whether it's mobile, 24/7, like we mentioned, and other ways that they, perceive that they need to be interacting with us. ERP integration would be another example there for that. But if we think of client journey, that covers one aspect of our payment flow. I think Chris mentioned a little bit about, a lot of tech debt that we have in the big banks especially, right? So that client journey essentially ends when they click submit and they originate that payment. But it's a complex flow that it goes through internally, through a lot of hops, through a lot of systems, to Rakesh's operations team and a bunch of, steps to process that payment. So we're also looking at, what we're calling a payment journey. Like, what is that transaction life cycle through our infrastructure, and how can we find ways to optimize that and make sure that we, understand resiliency and failover and, processing logic and all of the stuff to make that payment. Ultimately it will end up being more efficient and come back to the client quicker. But, if we looked at it just from a client lens, I think we would miss, all the work that it takes internally to process that transaction. And the other piece that I think we can't miss out on with this is the clients, with the functionality that they want. If we don't have a handle on the data and how we manage and supply our customer data, our payment data to our customers, I think we missed a real opportunity, not only for how we can give them some features and functions, but how we can also utilize that logic around the data internally. We can put more predictive models around our volume and flows. We can, better fraud and sanction screen some of our transactions. So if we have a good handle on the data, I think we can, really transform the payment flow internally. And so I think, when you talk customer journeys, I think you got to look more than just the customer view. Clearly, that's where we want to focus, and we want to make it the best experience for our clients. But we have to look internally. We have to look at, some of the technology that we're rolling out, and I think data becomes a really critical piece of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think data is going to be a lot more valuable and is still quite underutilized. Maybe, Simon, if I could ask you, what other emerging customer demands or market expectations are you seeing that are really putting pressure on banks to modernize payment operations?
I think just extending on some of the things Jason mentioned earlier, in the previous question we spoke about how I spoke about a thing called the form factor or the channel in which we interact with. Increasingly our customers, be they big institutional corporates, be they sort of more mid-market business banking, be they two-legged customers like us, they don't interact with our form factor that we own, that we build. So, if you look at, what we do every day and how we make payments every day, we increasingly do not interact with a bank form factor in what we do with regard payments. And we look at ecosystems. When you get out of an Uber car, when you order food off Just Eat or Menulog, you are not actively in the moment making a payment through the traditional form factor that the bank operates. You're lucky if it's co-branded. And so, I think how we actually move to that like open API-based architecture, where the form factor is a component, but actually many different layers in that stack of what you have to expose to your customers, and particularly the institutional customers, and particularly in the corporate banking, tram banking space, how we actually start to leverage less of the form factor and more of those underlying services and start exposing them to our customers. How we have more unattended channels where processing, bulk files of payments, instant payments is not something that's done directly through a Wells Fargo or a CBA front end, but through whatever front end our customers wish to choose. But then how we move and monetize and offer value-added services to our middle and back in that process, how we help customers with fraud, how we help customers with their reconciliations, how we provide them with the data that they need, how we help them with liquidity management, all things that we are capable of doing when we think beyond that form factor and our own internal processing as well. And I think that's certainly, we're certainly seeing that in our market, in the UK and Europe, emerging in the US as well, in increased demand to move down that stack from our transaction banking customers.
Yeah, that's a great summary of some of the additional areas that banks can try and create, a value-added service layer. Chris, I'm wondering if you've seen examples of some banks that are doing that well, or being relatively creative in finding, new ways to add incremental value to the core capabilities of funds transfer.
Sure, and just to build on what Simon said a little bit first, I think the expectations and customer demands are really being driven not so much within the banking environment, but outside. The things you can do now with your phone, the digital revolution that's taking place is pushing consumers and businesses to say, well, why can't I do that? Why do I have to have 3 options to make a payment? I think the banks have done very well, Wells Fargo included, with your, I'm a Wells Fargo customer, with your digital apps and being able to service and do self-service and do some payments. But payments is kind of the last stream here, I think, in terms of full digitization, because when I go online, it's a wire transfer, it's this, it's that. I just want to make a payment. I just want to send somebody money. So how do we make that simpler? Real-time payments and other forms of payment might make that simpler, but I think that's where the expectation is. The Uberization of payments, where you get in the Uber, you take the trip, you get out of the Uber, done. How do I make payments that easy? I think that's really going to be where banks can separate themselves.
Yep, that makes sense. Simplicity and being easy is certainly a hallmark of any digital business done well these days. I want to ask this group a little bit about one particular capability, because I know it's meaningful to our audience around cross-border payments, which is Swift GPI. And you could say that at the network level, that's a form of transformation, that level of transparency of information coming back from the payment destination. And maybe Rakesh, I'll ask you quickly, and then Simon, do you think this is something that the banks have a good sense of how to expose that to customers in a way that really improves the end customer experience, or are we still in early stages around that?
So my experience has been is that actually someone touched on the word fraud. I don't know whether it was Chris and Jason, but in any event, what I've seen is that, especially in the wholesale payment space, is that having the ability to understand where a transaction is in its life cycle is really paramount to being able to either prevent the transaction from moving forward and when there is a fraud, or being able to potentially get ahead of it and get to the corresponding financial institution to be able to help recover the money. So I've seen that happen quite a bit, and it's really been a product that's allowed for, especially what I'll call are the service teams or the investigations teams, to be able to understand where the payment is in the life cycle and help clients quite a bit.
Yeah, thanks.
I would,
that's a great way of thinking about it. Simon, some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely echo that. I'm sat here today in a place called Sydney, which is about as far away from everybody as it's reasonably possible to get. There is you realize, certainly haven't been in the UK market for a while. When you come to a place like Sydney, you realize just what a narrow window you have in any day to get anything done, if anything goes remotely wrong. And so the ability to expose things like GPI to our customers and embed that in our services so that they can see our, if I talk about the Commonwealth Bank, that our customers can see the status of their transaction and where money is moving around the world, particularly our larger corporate customers. That's really, really important for their teams, for their operations departments, for their CFO, etc. To know the status of that and have that just self-served and have them able to consume that directly. We've got to embed more of that, you know, be it GPI, be it liquidity management, be it some of the reconciliation services, more about what we traditionally thought of as operational capabilities for our own people, and expose those services in a highly digitized way directly to our customers going forward.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about taking capabilities that we use internally to run the operations and looking at where we can expose them into the customer experience. I want to pick up on another topic that several of you have referenced, which is liquidity management, and that's obviously, you know, a critical daily activity of banks, and payments are a dynamic factor in that. And Rakesh, I want to come back to you and just ask, you know, what are we seeing in modern technology that's maybe giving us new ways of new tools to avail ourselves of how we transform that aspect of payment operations?
So I think that, you know, if we look at liquidity overall, a number of financial institutions do a great job trying to understand which markets they're settling in and where they need funding, etc. So on an intraday basis, this works really well. Some do things better than others, but at the end of the day, I think everyone settles out well. You know, this is one topic which I think Lester hit on earlier, you know, what I would call trapped liquidity. And so, especially in this day and age where we're seeing a number of cyber attacks that are occurring, a financial institution, a large financial institution could be impacted. And so what you want to do is you want to be able to ensure you have the appropriate tools to be able to measure counterparty risk and to be able to, if necessary, execute a kill switch so it protects you and your clients from, you know, either trapped liquidity in another financial institution, or in simple terms, potentially even trapped liquidity at a financial market utility, and how you can settle at the end of the day. So these are things I would suggest people in the banking institutions look at, especially from a wholesale payments perspective.
Thanks, Rakesh. Simon, have you seen an opportunity, again, under this broad umbrella of payment transformation, ways in which banks could get incrementally more efficient with how they optimize intraday liquidity in a payment operation?
Yeah, I mean, there's many ways we can, certainly as we move to real-time payments. I think we've got to get a lot better internally at moving our sort of treasury and financial departments and our payment departments closer together at the seams. You know, we have lots of examples, I'm sure, within our organizations where they're not, and we're handing data over in a clunky fashion, or maybe end of day, or whatever period it is. As the world moves to real time, we need to bring those capabilities and that data together. But again, I think we need to offer more of those capabilities out to our customers. And when I say customers, like non-bank customers. Now, if I look at a mining company down here with a global operation across the world, you know, they need to understand real-time liquidity management. They want to understand their cash concentration limits. They want to understand where they have a funding need. They want to sort of start getting into multi-currency pooling. You know, we have to, if we are going to offer services to global companies with a global or big regional footprint, these are just basic table stake capabilities we need to have now. And underpinning all of the thing we call liquidity management and all the capabilities that sit within that fundamentally is the movement of value between stores of value, i.e. making a payment. And we have to you know, extract the data that comes with that real time and start pushing that into those liquidity management solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, corporates don't like it when they feel that liquidity is trapped. Chris, I want to bring you in as well, just and see if you have any other thoughts on, again, where you've seen some innovations around liquidity management, or and Jason was talking about data, that area too. So in this context of payment transformation, I know, I think on the surface, we're talking of, people assume that it's about dealing with legacy technology, tech debt. But in these areas, I think there's an opportunity to really, break some new ground.
Yeah, so on the data side, especially as real-time payments becomes more ubiquitous, and to the extent they're following the ISO 20022 standards, it puts a lot of data potential in a payments message, which can be used for a number of things. You consider, a global aircraft parts manufacturer. It's a regulated business. It's selling parts, to Airbus in France from Columbus, Ohio, and they're not going to send over a part until they get paid, and they need the data in the message to know which part it was because it's regulated. All the serial numbers, things of that nature, have to be tracked. So as a kind of a simple use case, it's really exciting to think about what we could do with the new message standards and the data we could put into, and how we can simplify and add value to our clients' lives, and have additional products to sell them to help take care of a lot of their regulatory reporting, other tracking needs. So I see the data element to payments transformation being very significant, especially in the business to business side of things.
Yeah, it's a good call out. I know that's been a long time friction, is the more straight through processing with the handling of remittance addenda. So I'm curious, so we're talking about payment transformation, achieving a lot of different objectives here. And, it occurs to me that some thought leadership around the architecture or around choices of technology is pretty important. So Jason, I'm curious if, how you see that thought leadership role and sort of that long-term perspective of maybe not future-proofing, but some sort of anticipation of things to come factors into to payment transformation.
Yeah, it's an important question, Craig, but I think the key thing is technology can't do it alone, right? I think, we could plan the best architecture and the best roadmap, but if it doesn't align with, the product direction or operational efficiencies and all the things that we're trying to accomplish as an organization, I think it falls really short. So I think the first key in understanding where we want to go is making sure that technology has a seat at the table with product, as they're defining the vision, the strategy for where they want to go with tools and technology, tools and products for our clients. It's sitting with operations to make sure you understand where they're looking for efficiencies and where you can improve their processing. And it's sitting with sales and implementation to make sure you have a sense of the pipeline, the volume, and the scale of things you're going to grow to. I think if you get to a point where your technology group is embedded in all of those groups, then you can start to lay out what do we look like today and where do we want to go tomorrow. And part of the technology ownership of that is being aware of how the industry is changing, understanding what new features and technologies are out there that you really should be adopting and you really should be driving your group towards. To really, I know future-proof is not the right word, because I think in our fast-moving technology space, I don't know if we'll ever future-proof, but maybe be better for the future at this point, right? So, I think that's where the technology needs to really use their knowledge and experience and skills in the industry to help apply those new tools and technologies to whatever the roadmap really needs to be. There's some clear ones out there around APIs, like I mentioned. I'm sure we're all moving towards cloud and containers, but you have to factor in things like distributed ledger and some new things out there that maybe aren't in the real-time space today that everybody's using. But if you want to really be prepared for where we're going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I think you need to start adopting some of those and playing with them internally and making sure you find the use cases to build your experience and build your skill sets so that when those do become prime time, you're ready for it.
I agree with that totally, Jason. And one of the challenges we at Deloitte see frequently, and not just in this industry, but is kind of our short-term nature of our planning and our strategic planning, right? So if we're only looking 12 to 18 months out, how do you plan for technology, which is changing pretty rapidly, when you need to have a sense further out where you're headed to be able to plan that technology roadmap to be there to support that business when it gets there. So those are some of the challenges we see, and it really, the most effective companies are the ones that really truly partner together and create that longer term view of not only the business, but the technology art of the possible and the technology needed to solve the business problems that they're anticipating, 5 years down the road.
Yeah, there's no crystal ball clearly, but on the other hand, right, we've learned how quickly new things can come along. Rakesh, I'd love to sort of extend on that topic a little bit, but into the area of skill sets and talent, and what have you seen, or what are you thinking about now in terms of how we keep evolving the skill sets that we need to be on top of the way our industry is changing in payments?
So I think that Jason hit on this earlier as well, but there's a constant evolution that's happening in the payment industry with not only these faster payment products, but virtual accounts, and there's a constant reinvention of our ability. And I think Chris said it earlier, being able to deliver more mobile solutions. And so given the quickness of the settlement process, and given the fact that we're trying to provide this in a more mobile environment, it's going to require our teams to now start becoming more aware of certainly of these deliverables, but at the end of the day, understanding some of the capabilities that we're about to offer, being able to be agile enough to be able to help us transform the operating environment, to be able to meet our customers' needs. But lastly is measure our success. How do we measure our success, especially in a fast-paced environment like this?
Yeah, that's a great point on looking at outcomes and KPIs or other sorts of measurements. Jason,
I was going to build. Sorry, just going to build on just quickly, if I may,
sure.
on Jason's comments earlier. I think there's sort of three guiding principles. We're never going to see all things in the future. But I think there are three sort of immutable things that we have to move towards as an industry and the sort of traditional banks in the payment space. One, everything's going to collapse to instant rails. So like everything you do has got to be like thinking along that line. We're not going to be collapsing into checks or Fedwire or batch-based systems. Two, I think layering the architecture clearly, just componentizing your architecture, making sure that things do what they're meant to do. We have a lot of, I know we have, and I know everybody on the call has examples of where the layers and the journey of a payment are mashed into single systems and points of failure, which means change is expensive, it's very slow, it's very time consuming. So create the layered architecture and make sure you do that. And I think the final thing is everything's an API. Just everything's an API. If we don't start thinking through that mindset, wherever it's hosted, on-prem, in the cloud, but particularly in the cloud, if everything is not an API as a mantra, it's really, really hard to get that agility going in our kind of organizations.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So I'm going to segue maybe to a question around that extends on that level of normalization you're talking about, where everything's an API, right? At what point, and Simon, I'll just go back to you quickly and then go to some of the others. I'd like to hear everybody's opinion on this. When will we no longer have payment types or payment rails from the customer perspective? I know there will be, maybe more than one actual, national settlement system in a country that does interbank settlement, but are we moving towards a point where we're able to provide, funds transfer services that from the customer perspective, a payment is a payment and they're not managing to different payment types?
I think we're past that point for consumers already.
Yeah.
I mean, with the exception of physically writing a check, I don't think most of our consumers would tell you the difference in terms of rails and infrastructure of when they go in and tap on a merchant terminal to when they transfer money in their app. I don't think they tell you the difference in rail schemes and infrastructure. Right? The Uberization of payments and the desire for it just to be invisible, and as Chris mentioned earlier, just a thing, just money moves from A to B and I'm done. I actually don't really care about the journey at a consumer level, at least. I think we're past that point in like multiple jurisdictions around the world. I think the institutional side of things, there is a way to go, as there is still a lot of choice and a lot of the complexity operation is still very visible to our customers in that space, and we've got to increasingly break down those walls as that collapses.
Chris, what do you think?
But I do
So,
think
from a bank operational, I agree with Simon in terms of how consumers may view things, but from how we have to handle it and deal with it at the bank, I think we'll get closer in the next 10 years. I think all the systems we have today, wires, ACH, checks, you name it, debit, credit, it all exists to proxy cash. And once we can get to something closer to digital currency like a CBDC, then we don't proxy cash. We just move the token or whatever form it's in. So I think that's really where it's going to be. In fact, Lael Brainerd from the Federal Reserve was out talking about it today and making a case for it, almost making a case for it. It'll take a while. Certainly other countries are starting, and it's gotten into the political frame right now, so it could have legs for now, but to me that's where the rails go away and you're just moving payments, and that's when we can get it to a token or some kind of account-based digital currency.
Yep, you're right to bring that up. I do think that is going to be another normalizing effect. Jason, any thoughts on that? And then Rakesh, I'll go to you for last thoughts.
I think, both Simon and Chris are spot on, but I do think, from a commercial standpoint, I think you'll see a more facade-based approach where, we will try to shield the client from the complexity of the payments ahead of the rails consolidating. So things like a single payment entry screen where, they don't necessarily pick ACH or wire or RTP. They basically, to Simon's point, I want money to go from A to B, and under the covers and in the most efficient way, we'll determine how to do that for them. So hopefully that comes before, and we don't wait until the actual collapsing of all the rails to give it to our clients.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Simon's spot on. This is already in place in the consumer space. No one really determines if they're going to send a ACH transaction or a wire. They just send money. And I think we just need to evolve to get to that same level from a wholesale space. And, without getting into too much detail, I think there is certainly a number of banks, number of financial institutions that have started talking about potentially a clearinghouse of activities. So I think it's evolving, and it's probably not too far away.
Great, thanks all. So that brings us to the end of our time. That we had a lot for the panel, but I want to thank all four of you again for sharing your perspectives with the audience here. I think clearly you're deep into the amount of change going on in the payments industry. So thank you for your time here today. Hi there, welcome back from the break. And hopefully you found that panel discussion as interesting as I did while I was talking with our panelists. And we have a couple of them here with us at the moment to take some of your questions. And so I hope you'll use the email address that we provided. It should be on the screen, and feel free, even as we're in the middle of this session right now, to send them in, and we'll try and get to those. But I'll start off with some follow-up questions. And particularly, I'd like to pick up right where we left off there, where we were talking a little bit about, when will payment rails, or how might they converge to the point where a payment is a payment? And I thought, the panelists made the very accurate point that for consumers, that's very much the case already. So what I think I'm going to do is first, and I'll go to Chris and then see if the other panelists have any follow-up thoughts. But with commercial, corporate, and institutional customers, right, there's still some stronger opinions about what those customer types are trying to achieve with payments, and they have transaction costs to manage. So Chris, what are the ways in which banks will still be thinking, even if a payment becomes a payment, thinking about differentiating their services?
Sure. Thanks, Craig. So in my view, the background, how the money moves, will consolidate and be somewhat generic. But what you do on the front end, your digital front end, your customer experience with those corporate customers, the data that moves will be where you can differentiate. So the new payment standards, ISO 20022 and others, allow for a lot more data in that payment message. So you'll be able to craft products around that to be able to help clients with their compliance needs, their reporting needs, their financial needs beyond just the money movement. So to me, how you engage customers for those payments and what you do with the data will be the key areas of competition.
Yep. No, that makes sense. I think that, on the front end, there's certainly a lot of customer experience still to play with. Another point that came up there at the end, I think that Simon was saying is, here's how to think about the future. Everything's an API. Everything will become an API. So Jason, I'm interested in your thoughts on if we disaggregate our services so extensively like that, are we raising the bar on ourselves in terms of what sort of internal organization or governance we're going to need to manage the potentially additional dependencies?
Right. Well, I think we'll have to change, right? I think moving to a more API-enabled world will cause a lot of things to shift and change, but you have to think about it to a certain extent. We still are going to have to deliver products, and those products will be built on top of the APIs that we also produce. So I think while we move to APIs, we also become one of the consumers of our APIs. So, Chris talked about, digital and the client interface being a differentiator. I think that's absolutely true, but that digital interface should consume the APIs that you publish out for people to integrate directly with. So while I think it changes, it still doesn't take away from some of the credibility that we have to bring to the market as far as products and capabilities. APIs just makes that further step in allowing people to integrate themselves in the way that they want and to do something potentially different than what we might see the APIs being used. But I think when you think about the organizational construct of it, certainly there's different skill sets. There's probably different aspects of that. You're going to start to look at like consumption of an API rather than number of users I have on my digital app. And so how we track metrics and success and reliability and resiliency, all that comes with a slightly different angle than what we would think of with a traditional product or something that we would roll out.
And so if I can just tack something onto that you made me think of, right? What are the potential scalability or volume considerations, right? Because you just got me thinking that with an API, right, you've got a machine sort of consuming it potentially persistently, right, which is a lot different from a user-generated interaction with the bank's systems. And does that create, new kinds of planning for you in terms of scalability?
I mean, certainly, as we're building APIs, in theory, it's a more modern tech stack. It's potentially run on some different kind of infrastructure deployed in a cloud where you have things like auto scale and, the capabilities to grow and shrink with volume that comes in. That's not always capable, but I think if you're moving in that direction and modernizing tech stacks and kind of going in that space, ideally you would change the underlying infrastructure to be able to support not only just more scalability and kind of real-time use of infrastructure, but the way that we handle resiliency would want to be a little bit differently. The way that we handle global traffic around the globe would be a little differently. So I think a lot of options come into play when you move to some of the cloud environments. But I do think, yeah, API model is going to be slightly different usage pattern than with traditional application.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, I like that notion of auto scaling. I'm going to have to learn more about that after the call. Rakesh, I don't want to catch you off guard here, but I want to pick up on something Jason said about us internally consuming our APIs, and it made me think about how that may expand or diversify the services, the internal management, right, running the operational shop tool set that might be available if quote everything's a service. And I'm just wondering if you had any quick thoughts on that, about how you might and your team might avail yourselves of more active tools and levers to have in real time if everything's an API internally.
Yeah. So a couple of points there. One, if we look at it from a data aspect, and if you think about all of the data that's moving, whether it's transactional data, customer data within an organization, if you have a centralized repository, we'll say, so a data store, and being able to call the information that you need on a real-time basis as you execute through your transaction activity. So as an example, if someone provides some sort of a mnemonic that says this is the identifier of an account, that you are able to pull that record and populate your transaction so that it can process more straight through. Another type of action that you might use that for is, when we look at it from a real-time payments perspective, is really being able to understand when that client is starting to execute the transaction, can you build predictability in trying to understand where that transaction is going to ultimately settle, and is that something that they've executed through previously? So, in simple terms, doing a fraud check while the transaction is being executed.
Yeah, those are great. Those are really good, clear examples of STP, or further enabling STP. STP obviously as a concept has been around for a while, but the more real-time enablement of it in the moment. I appreciate. Thanks for those. Hey, Chris, I wanted to get your thoughts on this topic as well, and maybe you can weave in a little bit of perspective on what does this mean if everything's an API. What does this mean for product managers? What is the product and what are they managing?
Right. So I think the products become more technical, but there's still a requirement to be able to work with the businesses to understand what their needs are and how that would apply through an API. There's also going to be a significant governance layer here, both from understanding who your client is and why they're connecting to you, as well as the whole cybersecurity aspect of it, to make sure that by opening APIs, you're not inadvertently creating security or risk issues. So I think the product management kind of moves more towards that. It's more technical and it's more security oriented, in addition to traditionally understanding businesses and how those items, how those APIs apply to solving business problems.
Right, that makes sense. I guess you mentioned understanding some of our larger, or any bank understanding the largest clients. I know in the panel we talked about this a little bit. I think Simon was referencing the idea of large global multinational mining companies, et cetera. Rakesh, I know that you and I have talked a bit about in the past, our largest payment processor customers. How do we need a more specific segment view of that part of the segment as we go through payment transformation, anticipating that the needs of our largest clients, or maybe it's our correspondent bank clients, as another variation of our largest, and those really plugging directly into our core capabilities, right? Do we need to start to plan for that segment as a very deliberate, specific need set that's diverging from the general market?
So I think that, if we look at it, especially from a distributed ledger technology perspective, lots of financial institutions are looking at that as an opportunity to be able to move transactions between, a financial entity, maybe more cross-border, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the evolution from a wholesale payments perspective to a pseudo currency potentially may allow us to be able to create the ability to deliver funds in a different fashion, and I think there's good work underway around it. But certainly, if we look at the bread and butter of wholesale payments today, there are purposeful transactions that are being executed for very real activity. So my sense is that we are certainly making efforts to get into a more seamless delivery of transactions, especially cross-border, but that purposeful, I want this transaction to settle via Fed, or I want this transaction to settle via real-time, etc., are still near and dear to us at this point.
Yeah, certainly they are. Yeah, no, you're right. That's still, I think I would agree with that. That's going to be the bread and butter of the business for some time to come. Nali, let me see if we have, do we have any questions that have come in?
I guess we do have a question. So the question is, banks are trying to innovate and look forward. However, is the limiting factor the market infrastructures to get us to the next level, even with things like faster payments? With all the talk about digitization, are CBDCs the infrastructure that will bring us to the next level? Or can the industry change its mindset to create a new infrastructure that could bring us to the next level?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that extends a little bit from Rakesh's comments at the end there about digital currency. So yeah, maybe Chris, I'll go to you first, and it'd be great to get your thoughts on this. Our market infrastructure is going to become a limiting factor, even as banks, using that shared infrastructure, are engaging in transformation, and our central bank digital currencies potentially one way in which the shared common industry capability gets to a next level.
It's certainly possible. Some argue both sides of that it's not required to get to the next level with digital transformation and modernization of payments. So I don't know that there is a right or wrong answer right now. It's still a bit early days in CBDC. The Fed is studying it for sure. Other countries are moving forward with pilots, but it's still very early days. That said, it does solve a number of issues, but it also creates a number of issues. So I just don't know that, I don't feel like CBDC is going to be that we can't modernize payments currently. I think we can without CBDC, and that will just take us to another level. But certainly modernization can happen now prior to that CBDC coming online.
Yeah, that's similar to my perspective. I mean, as you say, it's early days. Jason, I'm interested if you have any thoughts on this. I've been reading more about CBDC in the last 2 months than in I think any of the prior years in this role, and learned a lot. And I think that Chris has a good point here, that this is seemingly leapfrogged a path of modernization that was relatively well charted with, real achievable objectives before CBDC gained so much, industry chatter. But Jason, what, I know you read a lot about this stuff too. What are some thoughts you've had even in these early days?
Yeah, I think Chris was right on. Like the big banks have already all started with what they call transformation, and some of that is transformation, but a majority of that is just modernization, right? Because many of the big banks have legacy platforms that their payment rails are running on, and so just to get to some newer technologies to provide things like real-time capabilities is necessary regardless. When you throw in something like CBDC, it might be something that the banks can rally around and get together quickly and try to do something. I don't know if it's it's not a 6-month effort, right? It's still a multi-year journey to get to that. And I think beyond payment market infrastructure and things like that, I think there's a broader sense around the risk and security and aspect of that we go through as banks on how we process transactions and how we ensure all the regulations are followed, and I think that environment needs to, I guess modernize might be a new way too, because we're living with a lot of rules and restrictions on, legacy payment flows and payment concepts that, sometimes the digital currencies can overcome that in a technical way that we couldn't before, and so that would change how we're regulated and how we can do certain things. But that is probably another aspect that would have to be evaluated.
Yeah, that's a great point. Payment processing is not for the faint of heart, and I wonder about. I have similar thoughts as the ones you just shared whenever I think about decentralized finance. Let me. I want to go back to a topic that came up, and Jason, it was you who mentioned it in the panel discussion, and try and unpack it a little bit more, which is about further leveraging the data within the payment journey. You used, I thought that was helpful to sort of conceive of this idea of the payment journey, and what are some of the predictive services, right? What are some of the other ways in which we might really leverage data in the moment with that payment journey?
Yeah, and I think you can look at it in two ways, Craig. And, internally, like what would we use it for internally? And I think obviously fraud, that's an easy example that people pull out. We will get to a point with some predictive models where we would use it almost as a triage or troubleshooting model where we expect a certain volume or a certain value of dollars coming through our platforms at a given time of the day, and if that starts to fall off of our predicted model, we can maybe hopefully quickly identify issues and scenarios and circumvent outages and things like that ahead of time. So I think there's all kinds of options we would use internally. When you get to the customer side, what is the real value of customers? And I think that's the real untapped potential is, what can we as a bank offer our clients and value-added services with payment data that we can consolidate. And there's a lot of things in there, like from the most simple concept of, hey, we've recognized you've paid this vendor monthly for the last 6 months and you haven't paid them this month. Have you missed a payment, or is that something that you would like us to schedule? I think that's probably the most basic concept. And then you could get into providing your customers with some really strategic insights. And I'll take maybe more of a retail based example, but if you were Uber, let's say, and we could identify and let you know that 80% of your Uber clients also have a subscription to Bird scooters, maybe Uber could then find out a way to do a value partnership with Bird and gives them a leg up on, they already know how many of their customers are in that. So again, it's a very retail based example, but I think with payment data and the volume that we have, I think we could come up with an amazing insights that we can provide strategic value for our clients.
Yeah, those are good examples. I'll just see. I really think this is where some of the white space is in payments in the context of business strategy. And Chris or Rakesh, any other ideas that have come to mind for you? Chris, I know you talked to a lot of people.
I think that if Jason, what he mentioned, and I'll just expand on that a bit, but certainly understanding your volumes, your values across whether it's financial market utilities or even within internal applications, where you are in at a certain point in the day versus what your historical volume is. What that allows you to do is obviously understand that your transactions are flowing smoothly or not. But second to that is that if there is an issue, being able to understand quickly with that issue and being proactive to try to protect your clients in your bank if there's an issue that's happening, let's just say in an adjacent channel or with a particular client segment. And so using that data intuitively and being able to implement some level of controls around it to be proactive, certainly gives you a significant amount of benefit.
Yeah, those are nice examples. I think, what you're pointing out is that, I think that operational risk management becomes, ever more present in a real-time environment, and you're pointing out how there are tools in the data to counterbalance that velocity. Chris, any additional thoughts on what I'm calling the white space here with data?
Yeah, I think, I would pivot the conversation towards what data is actually coming with the actual payment message, because I think that is something that the real-time payments rails give you that the current rails do not, is an expanded data set, which could be used for all sorts of use cases around your business clients and consumers for that matter, being able to use that data to be compliant with regulators that they in regulated industries, to use it for financial reasons, for a whole host of reasons, including marketing, et cetera. So to me, I think getting the data out of the message, and as real-time payments progresses and volumes increase, you'll have a significant data source to be able to provide products to your clients to leverage that capability.
Yeah, that's a great point. That reminds me of something that I've talked a little bit about with the management team around treasury management here, which is product management that's data first, and what we mean or have meant is pretty much what you said, which is if we're conceiving of how a payment money movement service would work, let's design it with the data in mind, right? What data is going to be inherent, and then that we start to think of the data as part of the service, part and parcel with the transfer of the funds. We have a few minutes left. I'm hoping I don't see any additional questions coming in, but let me pick up on this theme that came up a moment ago in Rakesh's comments around security, cybersecurity. So see how I can phrase this articulately, but I'm wondering, right, how does the total Uber, what are the limits of the total Uberization of payments, right? So we use that term, and that's used a lot, right? You're just taking a car ride, and the payment isn't really something you're actively involved in. But as we scale beyond, the value of a payment value for the cost of an Uber ride to larger ticket sizes, right? And the threat of bad actors is omnipresent, right? How do we, are there limits to this total Uberization for all clients, for all payment types, when we're talking about more complex use cases? Rakesh, I hope you don't mind if I ask you to start.
No, I'm happy to start. Thanks. So, this goes back to the construct around data and being able to use data. And so if we think about a client, ABC company, as an example, who continuously sends transactions across the globe, but there are a number of countries that they're limited to. So as an example, they're sending to country 1, 2, and 3. And we have a repository, we understand their profile, we build a transactional profile for them. Even if they're sending transactions to country 1, 2, and 3, and it's more than the value that they send, typically, meaning significantly more, we may want to be able to alert on it, be able to respond back to them and ask them to determine if that's really a good transaction. The second is that, you know, if you're sending now to all of a sudden country 4, although it's still within the value chain of what you typically execute, may not be a good transaction as well. So being able to look at it from that perspective, I think, would be valuable. So I'll hand it back to you, Craig, or anybody else who'd like to comment on that.
Jason or Chris, any thoughts on cybersecurity in this very very connected value chain between multiple parties?
Only to state the obvious that it's becoming increasingly more of a risk for all companies, really. So you can't ignore it. And I know typically banks don't ignore it, but at some point it becomes a regulatory issue as well. So it's going to be forefront for a long time.
I guess the way that I would add to it, Craig, you know, you have to tie it back into APIs, right? So making sure you have the right security and protection against an API, because now you essentially have a funnel into your payment infrastructure that doesn't necessarily have the same type of traditional application login, right? So you want to make sure it's well protected. There's all kinds of different security models you can put in front of your APIs, but you know, it's another door that we've built into our payment rails, and so making sure that path in is as secure as the others is critical as we move forward as well.
Yeah, very good point. Comes back to basics in some ways. So we're almost out of time. I just have one last question. It's a little bit cheeky, which means there's no right answer, but I'm just interested in, Jason, I'll start with you, and then Chris and Rakesh. But in a real-time 24/7 world, when does end of day occur?
Yeah, it's a great question, right?
Sorry.
So I think from a pure processing transactions, there probably is no end of day. We can go on. I think you need the calendar cycle to do things like interest payments and some of those things, but I think as a pure transactional flow, there should be nothing that makes us have to stop and reset platforms or kind of recalculate, you know, positions. We should be able to constantly process transactions 24/7.
Chris,
agreed. There is no end of day or end of week.
Rakesh, any?
Yeah, so you need to ask Rakesh on his operations view to see if it's different. So.
Well, I mean, I think we certainly have a number of channels that are already operating in the 24/7 environment. So we've, you know, certainly proven that that's something that we can continue to support. You know, when we look at it from you know, the current market infrastructures, we're frankly speaking operating, you know, almost 22/5, and you know, expanding that to 6 and 7 is just a matter of time now. But you know, I think looking at it, you know, from an operations support structure, as you say, Jason, it's not just an operation support, it's also ensuring you have the right level of support from controls and risk and other disciplines, so that you know, you can certainly support 24/7 activity as we see various nuances occur.
Thanks. I appreciate you being game for that question. I know none of you had any advance warning, and it's a little bit of a curveball. And I guess my answer would be, I hope it doesn't mean that the monthly KPI reporting I'm responsible for putting together will at some point never be current, because that'll be a A tough needle to thread. Anyway, that's our time, and I really appreciate all three of you joining me, following up on the panel itself. I think this is a fun conversation, and I'm sure it's been helpful for our audience as well to hear these thoughts. So thank you, all of you.